Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of String Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Beecham. Today, we're also joined by a guest, Olga Kornienko, who is the COO and co-founder of Easy DRM. And just before we got on stage, I'm always trying to figure out how I'm going to open things up. And Olga, you mentioned you spent the weekend building some IKEA furniture, which conveniently, Nick is currently in the home of IKEA. So, Olga, I'm going to get to your experience over the weekend. But Nick, I want to know how much of your interior design furniture in your house in Sweden has come from IKEA.
Well, firstly, I'm also in the region of Småland, which is actually where IKEA was actually founded. So not only the country, but also the region, and not far away from where I live. I'd say, so we're renting at the moment, and we worked out that pretty much the entire house, from kitchens to bathrooms to a good chunk of the furniture, is basically all from IKEA. So I think it's one of those things that when someone's deciding they want to rent a place out, although renting's not that popular or common over here in comparison to some other countries, that they've only just spent a few hours walking around that maze of a store and didn't walk out until they basically bought the proverbial house full of stuff for it. So yeah, you can even see it's very easy to find things when they break, though, because you just go on and look them up. So at least if you know where to look, it makes a big difference, because there is some unique things. IKEA can be a little bit like Apple sometimes, where there's certain fittings and things that only really work with IKEA stuff. So it's good to know where to go, but it is still very much a destination here, as well as it is pretty much anywhere in the world these days.
And how did you do constructing yours, Olga? Because I'll be honest, in my household, I'm not the one that build things. I do all the cooking. My wife does all the DIYs, so she's the handyman. She does everything. I certainly couldn't do it even with their step-by-step instructions. Were you able to build whatever piece of equipment or furniture you were building?
So I grew up playing Legos and erector sets, and I grew up in Russia and former Soviet Union, and I had the metal erector sets that if you didn't quite properly connect them together correctly, they pinched your skin and all sorts of other things. Love it. Love it. For me, IKEA is like Legos, but for adults. You let me go and I will put, I do that for fun, as sad as it sounds. For me, putting together a kitchen, whole closet system, off I go. Love it.
Well, my hand's been slapped a few times when we have bought some stuff from IKEA, and I'm like, maybe I can give that a go. And I quickly get told that, go back away from the IKEA furniture. It's mine. So I've learned the hard way. Just stay back and let it magically appear the next day.
No, I love it. For me, it's, as I said, it's absolute fun.
Yeah, well, a little bit of lore about me, not streaming related. I remember I was about 5 years old, big basketball fan. My father's in the garage. He'd built his own race car, and he asked me to come change the oil while I was shooting hoops. And I remember I accidentally dropped the wrench in the used oil. And then my dad was like, just go back to shooting hoops. Like, you're never back allowed. And my dad swears this never happens. But I'm like, Dad, it's a memory I've remembered 30 years onward. So basically, I blame my lack of engineering skills on the fact that as a 5-year-old, I dropped the wrench and my dad was just like, go, leave. Like, even though he's a mechanical engineer, can fix anything, I possess none of those skills.
I said, it's never too late. You can start with IKEA and see where that takes you.
We can. Well, speaking of building things, we're going to talk a little bit around maybe one of the most important bits when it comes to constructing your streaming platform, your streaming service. And one of the areas, and this came up in our pre-conversation, is that recently it feels like content protection is a larger part of the conversation than it has been in the past, partly because of how expensive rights are and maximizing, your revenue streams from them. Or we look at things on the other side, like the falling out between DAZN and Ligue 1 in France. One of the one of the reasons was piracy is so rampant in the marketplace that DAZN couldn't drive enough subscriptions. And it just seems anecdotally, the more and more I go onto LinkedIn, the more I'm hearing about content security being a major point of emphasis for people in the space. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. And, as we're recording this, there's the breaking news that, UFC is now signed I believe it's a $7.7 billion deal.
Yep.
With CBS and Paramount Plus. So I'm sure Paramount Plus taking on those sets of rights will very much be looking at how they protect those, because as we know, combat sports has always been a big victim of piracy, given the fact that some fights could be less than a minute long and you better be pretty good about protecting your content. So it just seems to be a content are a topic that's continuing to come up more and more. So Olga, we're hopefully going to learn more about this space and sort of where it needs to fit within the streaming. Your build, your setup is also how do you maximize the revenue from protecting your content. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully gain some more insights from you on this particular topic. And Nick, I don't know if there's anything else you want to frame this, or if I've gone on a long enough soliloquy before we go and jump into it.
Look, I think you've covered it pretty well. I think there's a load of aspects to this topic that we've not had a chance to cover, and particularly as you're seeing sports properties and broadcasters looking at more ways of distributing content rather than just single channel approaches these days. It's even more important than ever to know where and how your content's being accessed and distributed and protected. Otherwise, you're probably leaving a lot of opportunity, a lot of revenue on the table, and having a very leaky ecosystem that is not going to, when we see profits and profitability of streaming being such a key part of everyone's challenge in this space right now. There's one thing you can really focus on that can help that tangibly, and that's what hopefully we're going to get a little bit more about today.
Well, we always look at security as a strategy. It can't be let me slap this on at the end kind of a conversation. Though the way we build our system, if you really had to do that, you can. But in the grand scheme of things, your approach to security has to be a strategy. Ideally, glass to glass, but that doesn't mean that the moment you decide to just do security, you have to do everything. Basically, we as Easy DRM started over 20 years ago doing specifically DRM. When we first launched, we decided to take the approach of let's do DRM in the easiest way to handle it, where we have a API for encrypting content and an API for playback, and we leave everything else behind the scenes. And we've been doing it successfully for, as I said, almost 20 years. And that's where usually people start. I kind of equate DRM to the lock on the front door. You don't want to put the cheapest lock on the front door. You don't want to go by the price, because at the end of the day, the cheapest lock on the front door of your own house is probably not the greatest idea in the world. But the lock on the front door, if we take it to the security of, our homes kind of a perspective, that's not the only thing we need. A camera that looks to see who's coming and going and various other parts of it, and so on and so forth. So recently we've been looking at various other aspects of security as well, adding on to the DRM bits. But yes, there is a lot of it, and you can just pick a point and start there and grow on slowly but carefully and without, rushing into a crazy expensive solution. Because at the end of the day, our experience is that a lot of people understand that there's piracy, but sometimes it's kind of hard to put a finger on how much it is, what percentage it is. And also sometimes people look at security just as an expense, which is something else that I think the mind is shifting, and people are seeing that their content is popping up on all this in other places. I mean, piracy sites and all these other sites where the pirates don't really need to worry about hosting content, encoding content, packaging content, getting the rights. They just take it. And DRM itself and by itself cannot withstand the onslaught of pirates. And now I'm guessing AI helping hack into all sorts of things and whatnot. So additional other things are coming into play, and we've seen contracts ask for more than just DRM.
I will say, I love the analogy, and maybe I've just not paid. No one's ever, or at least I've not personally heard the house analogy. And to your point, like there's multiple ways, we hear people talking about all these different things, watermarking, password, all these different things. I love that analogy there. Maybe specifically though, where does the DRM sit within that space in terms of where it sits within that overall process or that overall protection that you're going to build around your property?
So DRM is like if we're going to stick to the house, it's the lock on the front door. Or in your regular, we've all logged into bank accounts or whatever. It's your username and password. And based off of that, that DRM, in the grand scheme of things, DRM is a technology that says how you can use the content. Can you play it? For how long? Can you cast it? Can you have if I'm watching it on my computer, can I have a monitor attached to it, and so on and so forth. And DRM in and of itself controls just that. The encryption that happens during the DRM process is a vessel, if you will, to get the rights onto the content. Usually in the workflow, it happens around encoding packaging. That's the first part where content is prepared. And then the second part of it, like we've all probably dealt with, when you press play, as an end user, a license is delivered to the end user. And that is the second piece of it where you get to view the license. There's also a common misconception when people say my content is decrypted. The content is actually never decrypted. It is unlocked. Going back to my front door example, when you walk into a house or a hotel room, you open the door with a key or a key card, you never physically rip the lock off the door. Kind of sort of the same logic with DRM. You know that you have access to go into this specific spaces, but you don't take the lock off the door. And as a company, we're also working on other things to make sure that hacking into DRM, harvesting keys and all this other stuff is becoming more and more difficult. But in the flow of the process, it usually on the encoding side and pieces on the playback side, because it is a two-part process.
So, Olga, when you describe that, it makes complete sense. Its importance and its necessity. So why is it that not everyone uses it? What is the benefit of having DRM versus not?
I think part of it might be some more of an older thinking of it's an expense. I've also had people contact us and say, hey, we're trying to set this up, but we've been trying to get this set up for a couple of months now, and it doesn't seem to work with a different vendor. We built our system in a way that we have a very straightforward process, and then we partner with everybody. And we don't try to do everything ourselves. We have encoding packaging partners, we have player partners, and we make sure that we have integrations already pre-done with them in order to get going. We have a very transparent price, and we want people to understand what is happening, how it's happening, what the parts are that are involved in the process. And I have seen cases where that's not the situation. I've had people be like, oh, this is how it works. We didn't understand because there was no proper documentation or whatever. Or the price was so high, we just couldn't. Or whatever the situation may be. And sometimes it's just another thing to think about and you just don't want to and you think you need to build it. So, conversations of build versus buy come into play there as well.
So just take that question a bit of a step further. Obviously, the typical workflow, you've got the ingestion, the encoding, then the packaging and encryption going on. And then things get sent to the storage, wherever it's stored, and then it comes back and there's an acceptance of access to the platform. That's kind of how, from what I understand, the process and flow to work like. Just what happens if they don't have a DRM there? What happens instead? Is it basically just the encryption is next to non-existent, and that's why it's a problem from a security perspective, or how does that happen if someone's not using it currently?
Well, there's no DRM that the content is in the clear. That's what it's called, and it's not encrypted and not protected. I've had people say, well, I had a very long conversation with somebody doing fast channels who told me they don't need to do DRM on fast channels because it's ad supported. Okay, but you're still licensing this content and you're still playing this content. So what's to stop, a completely different site from just taking it from you and running their own ads or doing something else? But realistically, people try to do tokenization, people try to do URL obfuscation and various other things. But at the end of the day, the content itself is in the clear, and absolutely nothing stops me from recording, just screen grabbing the content. At the end of the day, there is no technology in the world that would prevent me from putting a phone in front of, or a very good camera in front of my TV and recording it that way. There's nothing that stops you right now. Watermarking can help you track it down afterwards, but I think it all depends on what the company is trying to achieve. But if there's no DRM, it's going to be the same as watching this podcast after we're done. It's just going to be in the clear.
Well, I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about content security is there's some people out there that rightly or wrongly, we'll go with wrongly, say it's a badge of honor if someone wants to pirate my content, that they can understand why an NFL or a Premier League would want to protect their content. But there's some people out there that are like, hey, I would love for people to even know we exist and would love for them to, if someone pirated our content, that means we finally made it. But, you've sort of explained a little bit, but like in terms of the mentality of changing people to understand that this isn't something that is just a problem for the big whales in the ocean, it's also something that goes down to the lower ends of the ecosystem, sort of where there's misconceptions about that idea that just because I don't sit at a certain level that I don't need to be focusing on this is a problem for me.
From my perspective, you are still paying to produce this content. You have the infrastructure to, package it, encode it, stream it. You're paying for bandwidth. You're paying for, maybe you're doing your own player development. You're paying everybody to get this content out there. And sure, absolutely. I know that for a while there were companies that were using piracy as a marketing tool, but that only goes so far. If all of your content is stolen and you're not making money off of it, or you're not getting any return on investment, as my co-founder says, we're all a .com, not a .org, right? And in order for us to continue producing content, we need to be making money on it. So I think, and Chris, to your point, I think a lot of the conversation like that goes to, I think it's very expensive to DRM protect for somebody who is small. And to those people, I'd say do some research, because prices for DRM are not what they used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm not saying it's a race to the bottom, but the prices are very reasonable. And we, and just like other companies, or a good amount of companies, do it based on usage. So if this month you had 1,000 views and next month you had 10,000 views and then 100,000 and then back to 1,000, you pay per usage, and that becomes manageable and makes people feel more comfortable.
And you mentioned you guys have been around for over 20 years now. In terms of the evolution, we are transitioning to a more streaming heavy world. How have you seen the development of content security going from a world that was largely linear broadcast to now there's more streaming? Is that, compared to linear, is it more complicated, less complicated, or just completely set of different problems? How have you seen just the evolution of content security over that period of time, particularly as we're transitioning basically from one medium to another?
It's definitely a transition. And on the content security side, I mean, if we go back 20 years, we had technologies 20 years ago that don't exist anymore. A lot of standardization came into play also, which makes it so much easier for content rights holders to actually DRM protect content and just secure content in general. The more and more we get into the world of streaming, I don't know if there's going to be a point where we're all going to say there's just way too much content out there and I can't watch it and piracy drops. I don't know.
Yeah.
We can all hope, because there's just way too much stuff, but I seriously doubt it. And I think just like us, a lot more of the security vendors are talking more and more about what content protection is. Studios are mandating it. And as we shift into the world of streaming, not only is it important to have secure content, but also know where your content is coming from. Because knowing that the content you're watching is truly Disney or truly NFL, and the scores you're watching and potentially betting on have not been changed and nothing's been modified with the stream, becomes more and more important, because then there's less concern about manipulating, I don't know, the game, manipulating content, and so on and so forth.
Olga, I was just wondering, when you mentioned earlier about the fact that there's even when a request is made when someone's trying to log in or access it, there's even things like the screen like recording of the experience. There's also the casting onto screen that you help authenticate. Can you just give us a snapshot of what are some of those things that might be a typical within the ecosystem there that might have to be authenticated that your clients are using?
So in the world of DRM, most DRM technologies have a certain set of rules. And those rules depend on technology, but in the grand scheme of things, it is whether or not the content can actually be played. If it is in the browser, it's just one play and that's it. If it's on a mobile app, you can have content that can be played for a period of time. So think your, I don't know, Netflix, Hulu, pick your poison. You can buy a movie and watch it for 24, 48 hours, right? Um, and then as the technologies allow you to control things like, can you cast? Can you prevent unsafe monitors on analog connections? And so on and so forth. Those are the most popular ones. But at least in the world of like movies and so on, those are also the kind of things that are dictated by rights holders. So when people go out and sign a contract for the rights for streaming a movie, they say, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, but you cannot do that. They can specify that for specific, like for SD content, you can do this, but for HD content, you can't. You have to specify different encryption keys for different types of resolutions, and so on and so forth. And and if people are not sure what they can do, they can always ask their preferred vendor. I would say us, but I don't want to be presumptuous. But they can always ask us. We're very much open to saying, hey, here's what are you trying to achieve? And based on what you're trying to achieve, you should do this, you can do this, and you might want to think about doing that. But a lot of it is dictated by the way the technologies are built, and it's Play Ready from Microsoft, Widevine from Google, and Fairplay from Apple, and also what the studios recommend. Or I don't know if in the sports world, actually don't know if in the sports world, if rights holders control what you can and cannot do to that granularity.
I think it's case by case in a lot of instances on how big those contracts can be, depending on some of the companies you might talk about. I think what's interesting hearing you talk about that, Olga, is that it sounds like therefore that when we hear the discussion, have a discussion in sports about what warrants requesting someone to pay a subscription for versus just making things for free. One of the aspects of that can be the quality of the content, whether it could be a multi-view, whether it could be high definition or 4K, etc., whether it could be casting to bigger screens and so forth. Those layers, I think, are an interesting area where there are some major platforms doing that in sports. I can think of a couple, but I think for some sports properties that maybe they worry about other features, is maybe like access to different types of pieces of content, which is an important part of the product mix. But I don't think they often think about those aspects, the technological aspects, to improve the actual user experience and maximizing the value of what they buying is another way to add perhaps another product layer to it, rather than. I think I could imagine some people might find that really difficult to get their heads around if they were launching a product for a decent size audience. What is that key differentiator they can offer in a more premium solution to the base model?
Well, and also I think the other part of it is, I mean, they're in the world of mobile devices. How many phones are there, right? Even if on the Apple side, it's probably easier, but still on the Android side, how many variations of Android is out there? So kind of keeping it more generalized and not going completely off the deep end of, I'm going to make it this for this phone, this for this device, this for it becomes unruly. But having a certain basic set of features can probably differentiate a service, especially whether or not you can cast off your phone. Because that all of a sudden creates more of a lean back, watch the game or a race or what have you on your TV at home with your family, and it creates a more of a different experience. But for that, this is why you go to a security specialist. We do this. This is what we, sleep, eat, and breathe, and we can make recommendations and tell you that this would work, or yeah, this might be a bit tricky, or because of the fact that you're trying to cast to whatever, set of televisions. not all of them support it.
Yeah, the example that comes to mind, Chris, that I'm not sure how they approached it, but I remember when the NFL launched their mobile only like plus offering. And one of the things that stuck to me as well is also betting rights. You see a lot of betting companies that will buy certain sets of rights right across the world. Is that how do they make sure that that stuff's not being used in other ways? Because otherwise it's just opening up the floodgates for someone basically buying a betting, accessing it free through betting platforms, and then just casting it onto their devices. So I don't know, it's just something that I thought that with the NFL example, I had always had that curiosity. It's like, well, can't people just be casting it to their biggest screen in their house? And I don't know what they did in to mitigate that, but I would have expected they'd have to have considered that quite heavily.
Well, some betting companies do use DRM on all of their content as well. Talking yet again from experience from a customer of ours, they do stream betting for football and American football. Sorry, forgot about the audience for a second. And they do use DRM on everything. So I couldn't tell you what specific rules they're setting, if they're controlling the casting or not. But that was definitely a requirement from the NFL that if you're betting on content, you need to be able to control all of that. Well, and also, and if we're getting into betting and just in general watching content, knowing that the score is right and correct and knowing that nobody's modifying this is also becoming more and more of a conversation in the world that we sit in. And to that end, there's a technology out there called, or not a technology, it's a set of standards called C2PA, which stands for Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And in the grand scheme of plain English things, that means knowing where your content comes from. Is it specifically from NFL? Or is it from Joe Bob at, mynflbasement.com? And also knowing that since the NFL published it, it has not been modified. So C2PA attempts to answer those two questions. So then as a user, when you are watching a game, if you're paying for a game, especially if you're traveling, you know exactly what you're getting. You know that it's correct.
I will say, if the goal was to educate today, I'll put my hands up in the air if anyone's watching the video. I knew there are things like, for example, I can go on my phone and I can, on my Chromecast, I can connect YouTube, can't connect Apple TV to it. I didn't realize that was specifically because of DRMs. So there we go. I at least now know I can walk away. The next time I try to cast something to my TV, I'll be like, gosh darn you DRMs. So at least now I know what that is.
Don't blame them. We're just
no.
We're just the messenger.
Yeah. Not easy DRM specifically, but just that is the set of technologies with which
Apple, though. That's
the
the decision, Chris. That's the decision.
That's the decision of who owns the rights.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not saying the strategy behind it. They all have their own strategies for why they've limited those things. But I've learned that it's the DRMs is the tool that may limit or be the gatekeeper for how you can access that content. Is that correct? Have I phrased that correctly?
Yeah. Basically, as part of the rule set, one of them is allow casting, yes or no. Yeah. And if you don't allow casting, you don't allow casting. And if the answer is yes, then go crazy.
Olga, the idea of that you're able to also see if anything's been altered, I think is a really interesting concept when you talk about C2PA, because obviously with AI coming as a more and more hot topic and the pace of the ability to alter content being so rampant these days, that could become a real issue for live and non-live, I think, content in the sports space. From I could think of a bunch of examples of that, but non-live could definitely be a big problem for content that's being produced across different channels, distributed globally, etc. And even if you think, Chris, on the live perspective, for things like this might be getting a step ahead of myself, but the technology that we've seen through a few different companies that allows different ads served virtually overlaid on the signage and the billboards of football matches and the like. Now, think about where it could get to is that could be tampered with. So if you steal those rights, then you could be overlaying your own stuff over the top of it, which I don't want to give any people any ideas, but there's one way to maybe I can play make some pretty big damage.
Well, and that goes back to whether or not the content is DRM protected. And that goes back to whether or not CTPA is on your content. CTP is coming more and more into play. You see it on LinkedIn when in the corner of a image, there's like a little circle-like thing that says CR. And that basically means that this piece of content, specifically a photo or video, has credentials. And you can click on that and see who owns the rights, who posted it. Right now, there's a lot of conversation about tagging content that is AI generated. But we've also been working and will be releasing a product shortly that allows you to sign your live content. Like if you are streaming a game, you can sign it on the fly. And you can also sign VOD, or if it's just-in-time packaging, you can sign all of your content and have it be out there. And then as you're watching this piece of content and something's been modified, you will be able to see on the play line where the way we're doing it is like if the play line is green or blue or whatever, and then you see the content kind of rolling through, and all of a sudden it turns to red and it says these sections here have been modified. Completely up to you if you want to trust them. And this way you know that somebody might have tampered with what is that you're watching. We can do DRM with C2PA. We can do them separately, depending on what you're trying to achieve. In the world of news or maybe recaps or whatever, you may not want to do DRM, but you definitely want to know that if you're talking about scores or what have you, that has not been altered.
It's very interesting. I think to your point, Nick, I mean, I think I saw something the other day where Amazon's looking at investing in the AI of Netflix, where they're going to allow people to basically alter original IP to create their own content, which I think is just mind boggling that someone like Disney would allow Amazon to go do that. But like, it does seem like that particular instance you raised there, Nick, is only going to become potentially more prevalent as AI becomes more powerful from a generative perspective and what it's already able to do. Some of the deep fakes, oh gosh, that's a can of worms right there.
Well, and from that perspective, I can also see the provenance information be used as I don't know, you cannot combine NFL and, I don't know, NBA content. You cannot physically combine those two properties for whatever legal reasons. So if we know that this is NFL and this is NBA, then AI would not be able to do that because whatever, that's what it's been told. I'm using that as a rough example, but I can see that provenance information could further down the line be used to control what AI can and cannot do as well.
So basically, DRM kind of acts as like the who can watch, but the CTPA is kind of where and if it's authentic and tracks its use, so to speak. Is that how you would describe it?
I wouldn't call it tracks its use. I would just say that you know what you're looking at. I mean, the most perfect case for C2PA is news, and knowing that the leader of a country said this, but they didn't say that.
Yeah.
Or, whatever the events are happening and being shown on TV, it's actually happening now and not footage from 7 years ago and another piece of the world and so on. As far as tracking what you are doing, that comes into the reason how we got to this podcast in the first place is the technology that I won the pitch with at the pitch off in Sports Pro Madrid. We are also working on a solution, announcing it shortly, called North Star. Actually, when I pitched it, we didn't have a name for it. It does not have a name, North Star. And the idea behind that solution is that using the C2PA signing algorithm, you can sign content at the edge or as the content is moving through the CDN. If you really wanted to go that deep, you can sign that content. And when somebody plays it back, you can get that signature back. And you can see that a piece of content that was delivered from New York is playing in Singapore. The question becomes why? Because if it is a tiny, small company, yeah, maybe they have one location and they're serving it from New York and it goes everywhere. But if it's a large sports property, They have relationships with CDNs. They have content everywhere. Content that is in New York should not be streaming to Singapore. So that it becomes a whole other conversation of what do you do with that. And the way we structured our solution is then the sports property can say, well, I'm going to let them watch it. Let's see what they're watching. Or, we need to give them ads every 3 minutes and make this a very miserable experience. Or just, no, we don't want to waste their bandwidth on it and we're just going to kill it. And it gives people, sports and rights holders, the ability to say, I'm just going to decide what I'm going to do with this person. But also it gives you access or visibility into what people are doing. Like, why is this one game getting pirated all of a sudden to Singapore? Maybe we should keep in mind that we need to stream it there legally, or things like that. But that's the tracking part of it. Is the other product that we're currently working on.
Well, what I will say, Olga, is you're already a podcasting expert, because I was going to bring up the fact that you were joining us today was because of your success in the Pitching Power Hour, and I was going to transition into North Star. So you've already done it for me. So you're already a pro. You're learning quickly. You just take my job. So yeah, it's like that, and ultimately, I think that's part of one of the reasons we were going to talk about was the fact that this is something that, with our Pitching Power Hour, for those that don't know, if you're listening to the Stream Time Sports podcast, you're probably aware that we host events because you've either been to an event or you've heard Nick and I talk about our events. One of the things we've done to try to change up and diversify the content, so it's not just listening to three blokes on a stage kind of all pat each other on the back, is we've introduced this Pitching Power Hour, and it's quite literally you're going to give a 5-minute elevator pitch into your product, and we have different members of our Sports Pro Media Awards judges there to go through, listen to it, and vote. And so this is something that was validated by those judges. This isn't something that you're just here to talk about. It is something that everyone else agrees it's important, which I think maybe validates the whole thing about the whole world of content protection is something that more people are seeing value in and being able to track that. So hopefully through that process, and just now that North Star officially has a name, again, like I said, there's a sign of people looking more for this kind of stuff, because some of the solutions within that Pitching Power Hour are not necessarily content security. And, I've mentioned this to Nick before. It feels like we used to kind of have to drag people at our events to go to the piracy sessions, where I think something like this validates there does seem to be a shifting of attitudes towards how important this actually is for people across the landscape.
I did notice that a number of people popped when I was pitching. A number of people popped in, and then I think as I was done, which by the way is a very nerve-wracking experience, because being able to stick a product into a 5-minute presentation, and then obviously the judges had criteria of, you have to cover this, and this, and make it all look seamless. It is actually not an easy feat. But I did see people come in, listen to my presentation, and as I was coming off the stage, get up and walk. So it was very interesting to see that security is becoming more and more prevalent and more of a conversation. And I think also people are trying to figure out how we as security vendors are solving problems. Because one of the problems that is still out there that nobody has solved yet is the question of key rotation. At the moment, oftentimes studios think that if you rotate keys out X amount of times during the broadcast of a game, it makes it more secure. Realistically, of course it does. Because even if the content is pirated, the moment the key rotates, the content stops playing. And then the pirate now has to go out and figure out how to get the next set of keys and so on and so forth. And that works gloriously if you have a small game when there's, 10,000 people are watching it. Because at the end of the day, the moment that key rotates, all those 10,000 people need to get a new license that very split second. It doesn't really work for an NFL size games when you have millions of people needing to get a license in the one exact second where the key rotates. And you don't want to have I'm going to call it an ugly experience where the screen stutters or there's a, blank time or whatever. So even though studios do like the idea of key rotation, hasn't really been a very prevalent solution specifically for that. So we're also trying to address that situation as well. And we're also releasing another product that would allow us to, I don't want to say split. I want to say split, but that's not the correct word. Maybe duplicate encryption on content. Because at the end of the day, DRM is very good at writes. It knows exactly how to handle writes and knows how to control things and who gets to view stuff and not. But it's not an encryption device. It does encryption to get its writes across, but it's not very good at encryption. In today's world, if you contact somebody like Akamai and get one of their edge servers on Linode, you can run encryption algorithms and do all sorts of things way better, way more economical, and with way better levels of encryption. So another product we're announcing, which is kind of crazy because we're currently working on 3 new products, is what we call a precision envelope key management, which would allow people, specifically, we think it applies a lot more to live content, but it would allow rights holders to literally double encrypt content. And you can control the keys and the encryption from outside of DRM. And you can control it from, as I mentioned, an edge server from Linode or something along those lines. Where now, in order for the hackers to get to the DRM content, they first have to break to the first layer of encryption and then get to the keys and then get the content. So at the very least, we're hoping it's going to make, piracy life just a smidge harder. But also, if you are double encrypting the content, you are looking at the fact that in a regular situation, you can see all the DRM headers kind of go across the wire, the web traffic, if you will, and you can sniff them out with HTTP sniffer type applications. You don't see them anymore. With a double encryption situation, you don't see DRM headers. You don't see any of that conversation going on. So it becomes a more secure solution to begin with. And we've tested it in a very drastic environment when we encrypt every single segment and there's no delay. We are at sub 200 milliseconds of being able to deliver the solution. We're currently testing it. We're going to test it with a broader audience, and we're going to work with a company who's going to try to beat it and see how far we get with that, with testing it to make sure there is absolutely no delay. But we're hoping that adding this secondary level of encryption allows us not only to answer the more of a secure question, but also allow us to get more precise with encryption in general, where I can give Nick one set of keys and Chris a different set of keys. So if hackers are trying to work together, they would have to hack into, even if they hack into Nick's content, they don't get into Chris's. And we can do that on a person basis. That becomes a bit unruly. We can do it on a geographical level in the US. And, New Jersey gets one set of keys, New York gets another, New York City versus I'm in Yonkers, and so on and so forth. And we can get very creative as to what we can do.
Yeah, I think Nick's raised this a couple times. We've had this conversation. It's going to be really difficult to stop piracy, but what can you do to make it really freaking annoying? And I think that's sort of the thing is like, you may not be able to stop it all the way, but can you make it annoying enough that it really ruins the experience? Because I think that's the thing about live sports, right? Is probably more than any other piece of content, being on time is so important. So can you make it annoying enough that it ruins the experience? I think we always use the example, if you're sat in 2 opposite rooms and the person that's pirating it is a minute behind, like, can you make that experience real enough that it's just difficult? And I think to your point, the degree with which you can manipulate the keys to just make it annoying enough, like that's, I think, probably a more realistic goal than cutting out piracy, from the root, I guess, in terms of being able to successfully take it off the air.
Well, I mean, the grand scheme of things, if you take the 4 things that we're currently working on, including our original DRM solution, you're looking at a piece of content that is DRM protected, which means that that only Nick, who paid for this content, is going to watch it, and he can cast it, but he can't attach a monitor to it or something along those lines. We know that this is authentic NFL content, And then we know that it is extra encrypted. And we know that Nick is watching it in Sweden while sitting next to an IKEA shop, IKEA store. And we know that nobody else is watching it. And if all of a sudden Nick's credentials or Nick's, I don't know, CDN tokens and whatnot are going to start popping up all over the place, we know that Nick is actively pirating this content. So we can take it away from Nick and from everybody else he's pirating it with. And what we are trying to grow into, and we think we're going to be very successful at it, is to actually create a glass-to-glass solution where we know that this is properly licensed content, we know where it's coming from, and we know where it's being played back from. And it allows our customers, rights holders, a lot more control and flexibility over what they're doing with their content. That's the goal. That's what we're trying to achieve right now. And since we're recording this right before September, if you want to stop and see us at IVC, we would love to see you.
Yeah, well, Olga, I am just looking at the clock. There were some other questions I wanted to ask, but just conscious, we're running low on time. But I do want to say genuinely, Nick and I said in the meeting just before here, we're hoping what we could do is people will walk away and understand what a DRM is and where it fits into the whole protection space. And like I said, maybe I'm the one that needs to learn more, given how much, given I've been at Sports Pro for 6 years, been to Sports Pro Madrid, now the Sports Pro Media Summit long enough. I should have known this, but like I've walked away at least with a better understanding of what are the tools that I sometimes encounter. I basically tell people what I do at work is I learn how the sausage is made. I now know a little bit more about the content security sausage, and I can say that's the DRM that they're using that's preventing me to do this. So I've walked away from this conversation having learned more about where a company like Easy DRM fits within the security space. So I appreciate you being able to talk it and put it in layman's term for someone like myself.
See, I think the big part that I want to, kind of continue your thought is I don't think you're expected to know about DRM. We are expected to know about DRM. And I think the biggest point I would like to get across is if people want to know what it is, reach out. If you want to know what a license is and how that works, reach out, say hi. Because we, as a company, we would love to have people understand it. And if somebody doesn't understand how DRM works and they would just rather not deal with it, schedule a half-an-hour call. We'll go through it with you. We'll answer your questions. We'll explain things. And at the very least, you'll have a better understanding of what it is. And that's kind of like, a name, Easy DRM. We try to stick to the easy part of it.
Yeah.
And make sure that even if somebody doesn't end up becoming a customer, at least they understand what is going on and why things are happening the way they are, and they're more comfortable with the solution. Why they wouldn't become our customer, I don't know. But at the end of the day, we are all about making sure that you understand what the technology that you're working with is. And we don't want to make it a black, scary, expensive box of unknown stuff.
Brilliant. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you coming on and talking us through that today, Olga.
Of course. It was fun.
Thanks so much, Olga. That was great. I'd have to say that just anecdotally, firstly, I'm not pirating anything here for those wondering, based on Chris as an example. But from the conversations I've had recently, protection and security of content is becoming a bigger and bigger concern, having huge impact. And it does feel like the industry is a little bit lost. And I'm talking at C-level and down as well, at what to do with this. So, Olga, thank you for giving us a bit of insight into what are some of the levers or the toolbox. So I think we've used a few metaphors today, ranging from sausages to can doors, but I think it's been really helpful to get a bit more clarity on where particularly DRM sits, because I know a few people have different levels of understanding and haven't needed to really understand it, or didn't really understand the need, didn't understand the need to know. And now hopefully we've given a little bit more insight. So thanks very much for that.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.